What are the true origins of Christmas? Like, where did Christmas actually come from?
Wow. Okay. Doesn't matter which direction you go in. What you're going to find is that it's, believe it or not, astrological based. It's to do with calendars. There's no escaping that. There was a whole cluster of different festivals that clustered around what we celebrate as midwinter solstice. But of course, the midwinter solstice, the timing of that is down to what's going on in the heavens. So I suppose astronomy, maybe astrology, it depends how far back you go. You can have a solstice any time between the 20th and the 23rd of December. It moves, it depends on the year, it can sort of drift. I believe this year I think I'm right in saying it's in the early hours of the 22nd. And it's the point where basically the nighttime, the darkness becomes the longest and the daylight becomes the shortest. So, what tended to happen, because obviously in prehistoric times and what have you, when they had stone circles and all that, the idea that you could have a day that was dramatically shorter than any of the others, that quite, impressed them. And then it sort of moves from that into the idea that, well, every day after that is getting lighter. So in one sense, you're witnessing the death of the year, and then in another sense, you're witnessing the birth of the new year. So there were dozens of festivals then that clustered around that idea, that concept. Um, so it could be quite broad. There's a number of dates. Do you want me to float into some examples?
Yeah, yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, all right, right. I'll drift into some example. One of the classic ones is the Jewish festival, Hanukkah, which sort of starts before what most of us would regard as the official Christmas, and it runs for 8 days. And that's really the origins of where we get candles from, because they light a candle every day for 7 days, which are on the branches either side, and then the centre candle, the eighth one, is lit on the last day. So this year, actually, it's gone early. They've gone quite early, so their Hanukkah's sort of done and dusted about a week before we get anywhere near Christmas. And I think it just this year it just comes up and touches on solstice, which is obviously midwinter. Um, that midwinter solstice, that is where we get a lot of the pagan traditions that you find clustered around Christmas. I'm mean, going very broad with this. People who are involved in Wicca and witchcraft, etc., druids, they all tend to cluster around the idea of this midwinter solstice, which this year is at Stonehenge. So they'll all be turning up on the 21st. They'll all be gathering at Stonehenge and watching the midwinter sunrise on the 22nd. By which time, of course, astronomically speaking, we'll already be into the start of the new year. Um, Moving a little bit further on from that, I mean, you've got the idea of the sort of 23rd, 24th, 25th. That is principally Roman. They had Saturnalia, which was their festival, which, funnily enough, goes earlier. I'm trying to remember when the date was for Saturnalia. Yeah, it's earlier. It's usually it's over by the 23rd. So it could run any time sort of between the 17th and the 25th of December was Saturnalia, and usually it was over by the 23rd. But the actual 25th, which is interesting, is Sol Invictus. It's the reborn sun, which I very strongly suspect has connections to Emperor Constantine the Great, who was around in the early fourth century, just after sort of 300 AD onwards, and he took Christianity, if you like, and Romanized it, combined it with the Roman festivals, the Roman calendar. So I mean, he was a lifelong worshipper of Sol Invictus. It's funny because everyone says, "Oh yeah, Christian emperor of Rome." It was his wife actually that was a Christian, because he only converted on his deathbed. So he's kind of edging his bet, if you know what I mean. He's,
Yeah.
he's kind of, I might get in, but only just. So, he sort of brought a lot of the solar things and the Roman festivals, he brought a lot of those in. Then you've actually, in some traditions, you're floating sort of towards New Year, and New Year is open to debate. It depends on what calendar you follow as when the new year comes in. But then that is the next thing, if you like, that then joins on, it bolts on, because we have sort of, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day. by this point you're into the well into the 20s, and of course then you've got New Year's Eve on the 30th, and then New Year's Day on the 31st. But if you look at the Celtic calendar, the Celts were keeping their New Year as late as the 16th of January, so it's kind of a bit of a movable feast. It tends to bounce around a bit. So that's really they're the broadest, probably the best known origins of Christmas, I would say.
Yeah, and so how much of the just going down the route of the sort of pagan um, traditions, how big of an influence do they have on the Christmas which we see today?
Um, well, it's interesting. What we're looking at now, I mean, I started off by saying, Hanukkah. Well, the whole Jewish thing, you're drifting back into the late BC period. So you're kind of looking at what, when the Hebrews gradually developed into what we now know as the Jews, the Jewish nation. So you're either side of, year one, if you like. You're going all the way back to that period. And then everything that's happened since then, every sort of race, every nation, every faith, has added its own flavor, if you like. So I suppose it depends. It depends on your view of what you would call pagan, because, of course, Jesus is born, so he's born in like 6.5 BC, because we know that from Chinese records of a comet that was around at that point. So, and also there's about a 7 year discrepancy in the Julian calendar because it was miscalculated. So that's about right. But then he's born in summer because it says, in the famous story about shepherds. Well, the shepherds are a summer phenomena in the Middle East. They tend to come sort of any time from March, April, right through to sort of September. So in that sense, the story comes from there, but that's not the true origin. The origins of the dates, very much like you say, lie with other traditions. Um, and all the stuff they bolted on. I mean, good grief. I don't really know where to get started with that. I suppose you could take a bit of a if you look at the whole Christian thing, you don't find anything really. This is going to blow everyone's mind. There's nothing really to do with Christmas in the Bible. I know that sounds bonkers, but your kind of little wooden stable with your snow, and your three wise men and all that sort of stuff. That's not biblical. I mean, the stable's a cave. You don't tend to get snow in the Middle East, and especially not in the warmer climates. The three wise men. It doesn't say three. They actually got names in medieval period. There could have been dozens of them. And if you actually look at how magi function, and you have a look at the Persian mystics and what have you, you very often discover that some of them are ladies. So the idea of it being men is a very traditional sort of medieval thing. Um, and the whole birth story is a bit bizarre as well. I would strongly encourage people to go and have a look at some of the non-biblical gospels. Go and have a look at things like the Gospel of Mary and what have you, because the birth story is very, very different, even in that. And funnily enough, the whole idea of a virgin birth, and we sing about that in hymns and all this and the other. Actually, yeah, I'm going to be quite radical and say, yeah. I mean, people go, well, she can't possibly be a virgin. She gave birth to Jesus. Well, whoa, hang on, back up a bit. Jesus is an immaculate conception. So if you can get, a female who is essentially a hermaphrodite to produce a child from nowhere, sealing her back up afterwards isn't going to be a problem. It's a belief thing. It's a belief statement. So go and have a look at some of the Gnostic Gospels. They're fascinating. The extra detail that gets put in. So the whole concept, the whole idea of what we view as baby Jesus in a manger in this little wooden thing, stuck out on the street corner somewhere, surrounded by three wise men and that. It's not quite the same. I would encourage folks to go and check that out. There's no link at all really between churchianity, which is what we've got now, and first century, New Testament Christianity. There's a void. There's a huge void between the two. And again, what would you regard Jesus as? I can throw a bit of trivia in here. They did a recent test, and apparently there are some people still alive today. They did a test on the Turin Shroud and came up with some DNA. And it turns out that the DNA they got for the blood samples off the shroud would put Jesus's family quite firmly as being sort of one of the offshoots, if you like, in that area of not non-standard religion. So it's very difficult to actually pin it all down and say, yeah, absolutely certain. That's it's all Christian, don't you know? Well, that didn't exist. That wasn't there. That's a bolt on.